After I started preparing for this morning, I thought all this sounded a little bit familiar. I think I've covered this recently. I looked back to what I preached last year in the run-up to Christmas. And on the first Sunday of December, I preached on exactly this same passage. So some of you weren't with us then, so it'll be a little newer to you. But I think we're going to cover something a little bit slightly different look at the passage from which we did last year. I just think this is a great way of getting ready, preparing, as Christmas is just around the corner. The question that I want us to think about this morning is, do we remember what we are remembering? Christmas is a time for remembering. But do we remember what we are remembering? Do we really grasp the importance of what it is that we remember at Christmas? From the beginning of time, God had a plan. And God's plan was always to have a people who would be his own. People with whom he would have a very special, very personal, eternal relationship. And the Bible, from start to finish, the Bible is the account of God unfolding that plan of his to have a people of his own. The Bible opens with Genesis. God starting to bring that plan into being, creating a universe for human beings to live in, creating the first people. And as the Bible moves on, we gradually see that plan of God having a people who are his for eternity gradually being unfolded. When we get right to the end of the Bible, when we get to the final couple of chapters of Genesis, we read in there of God being united to his people in a perfect place where there will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying or pain. God finally having those people, his special people, with him in heaven for eternity. It is that the Bible, from start to finish, is the ultimate happily ever after story. Except it's not a story. This isn't a fairy story for children. This is a reality. God created. And as we start to read the opening chapter of Luke's Gospel, we get our first indication that God's plan is about to take another major step forward. And we see that in verse 7. But they had no children. Anybody familiar with that flow through the Bible of God unveiling a plan to have a people of his own? Know that when you see that, something amazing is about to happen, and God is about to take his step to have a people of his own one more stage on. If you've been following the reading plan with us, if not, when we start again in January, we look through that reading plan, you'll read so many times in the Bible about women who could not have children. And then God giving them a miraculous child. And how that was the beginning of the next stage in God's plan to have a people of his own. Let's think about some of the miraculous births that there are, some of those well-known accounts in the Bible. We can probably start with Adam and Eve. It's not quite that, sort of miraculous birth, but the miraculous appearance of human beings. Adam and Eve had no parents. God just created them. And with the miraculous appearance of the first two human beings, so God's plan began to have a people of his own. Then God chose one family. He said, there's one family I'm going to set apart to be my people on earth. And who did he call to be the mother and father of that family, a childless couple? Abraham and Sarah, or Abraham and Sarai, as they have been up till then. Sarah was 90 years old. And God gave her a miraculous baby. And his plan to have a people of his own took a step forward as God started building a family through whom the Saviour would come. If I say the name Jochebed to you, does anybody know who Jochebed was? No, lots of shakes of the head. Not a name that we easily remember, and we should actually, it plays a hugely important part in the Bible. Look at the basket she's holding under her arm. Does that give you a clue as to who Jochebed might be?
Mother of Moses.
It's the mother of Moses. Not a miraculous birth, but the life of Moses, him being saved as a baby, is another miraculous story. God's people, that family of Abraham and Sarah, had grown to be many thousands, but they were living as slaves in Egypt. Pharaoh was scared that the Jews were becoming far too many in number. He says every baby born has got to be thrown into the Nile. Jochebed, under the guidance of God, did put her baby in the Nile, just as the law said, but she put him in the Nile in a basket that would float. God's hand was on him. He was rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, brought up in Pharaoh's palace. Jochebed even became his nursemaid in the palace. Amazing how God works it all together. Why? Because God was about to lead his people out of slavery, across the wilderness, and establish them as a nation. The next step in his plan to have a people of his own was moving forward, and God said, here's a baby whose life is miraculous, saved from death. Later on we read of Hannah. This was always when Cassandra was very young. She used to love reading the story of Hannah, and then Elijah in the temple being called, not Elijah, Samuel. I've even got it written down. Samuel. But we read of Hannah, a desperate desire for a baby. She was unable to conceive. God heard her prayer. She gave birth to Samuel. Samuel led Israel and ushered in the era of the kings. The next step in God's plan unfolding for a baby of miraculous birth. Every time that God moved his plan to have a people of his own forward, he brought about the great changes through somebody whose life was a miracle that they even existed. And now here we get that hint. God is about to do something amazing. The next step in God's plan is about to unfold. Why? Because there's a woman who cannot have a baby, but God gives her a miraculous child. And it reminds us, as we start drawing near Christmas, we remember that what we're remembering at Christmas is God's plan to have a people of his own beginning to unfold, beginning to take shape. This is part of a millennia-old plan that God has had to have a people of his own. The way it came about, the way it happens, tells us that God had everything in his hands, that God was working out a plan here. Verse 8, Zechariah was on duty and was serving as priest before God. Verse 9, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. God wanted to get Zechariah away from everybody. He wanted to get him into a place where the angel could appear to him and speak to him. God had to bring everything together. He had to make sure that his division of priests was on duty on that day. He had to make sure that Zechariah was chosen. Choosing by lot seems a strange way to us, but God was able to use that. God was able to make sure that his name was drawn, that he would be in the temple, that he would be there before the altar. The angel was able to appear to him in that holy place. This was so important. This plan that God was bringing together was so important. He had to get everything all lined up correctly. God had to take care of every tiny detail of this to make sure that it was right. So even the fact that Zechariah and Elizabeth were from the family of Aaron, it's all part of God's plan. Aaron was Moses' brother, the first priest of the Israelite nation. Only he and his family were allowed to go into that holy place. It was the descendants of Aaron, the priestly line, who were the ones who were able to stand before God and seek forgiveness for his people. God had been working this family line together over thousands of years to bring it to this very point where one of their own, where one of the people who stood before God to bring forgiveness for the nation would be the one who would announce forgiveness is coming. The next stage of the plan is coming. The one for whom you can have forgiveness is coming from God, from this altar where the priest served. God worked all of that together to bring this plan into being. As we begin to realise how long God had been working on this plan, how long God had been weaving all the events of history together to bring it to this point, we realise how important this was to God. What we remember at Christmas was so important, so vital, that God worked things together for thousands of years to make it happen. This passage also reminds us God didn't keep his plan secret. This plan of his that he was working together, that we remember at Christmas, was something that God had announced in advance over and over again. But when Zechariah was given a voice again at the naming of John, he praised God. And at verse 73, he talks about an oath that was sworn to their ancestor Abraham. Remember Abraham and Sarah were one of those couples that I mentioned earlier, given a miraculous child when Sarah was 90 years old. Mark this next great step in God's plan. God made a promise to Abraham and to that family. God said to Abraham, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. Through the offspring of Abraham, all nations will be blessed. What we're remembering at Christmas is the fulfillment of that promise. The fulfillment of a promise made all those years before to Abraham that one of his descendants would bring blessing to people from every nation all around the world. Zechariah's words there remind us not only that it was promised in advance, they remind us of what that promise would be as well. He reminds us truly of what it is that we are remembering at Christmas. He takes his son John in verse 76 and he speaks directly to him, this 8-day-old baby. And he says, you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare a way for him, to give people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. John's role wasn't going to be the one who brought about the salvation of God's people. I think some of the people there wondered if it was. His miraculous birth made them wonder, is this the Saviour? Is this the one coming? No, it wasn't. But he was the one who was going to announce the Saviour. He was going to point people to the Saviour. He was going to point out that it was going to be possible through this Saviour who was coming for people to find forgiveness of their sins. Referring to that Saviour who's going to come, Zechariah talks about Lord, title reserved for God. John was going to call people to trust in their Lord and Saviour, their God who was also about to be born, so that people would find forgiveness for their sins. That plan that God had been drawing together for thousands of years, that plan that we celebrate again as we come up towards Christmas, was an awesome plan. It was a plan that involved God himself taking human form and coming to earth so that people from every nation would have the opportunity to be a child of God by having their sins forgiven. That is what we remember at Christmas. We remember it because it reminds us how amazing God's plan is. We remember it because it reminds us how special we are to God. We are so special to God. That he brought this incredible plan together over thousands of years so that we could be forgiven. That is how much he loves us. If you had a family member who lived overseas a long way off, some of you perhaps know what that's like. But that family member wanted to see you so much that they started making plans for their visit a year in advance. Telling you, this time next year, I'm coming to see you. This time next year, I'll be there and I can't wait. And they were so excited, they were telling everybody about it a year in advance. They weren't just telling you they were coming, they were telling everybody else. In a year's time, I'm going to go, and I'm going to see them, and I'm so excited because I'm going to see them. And every day for a year, on their Facebook page, they're counting down the days. 365 days to go until I go and see my family. 364, 363. It's getting near, I can't wait. Wouldn't that tell you just how much you meant to them? Wouldn't that tell you something about how much they wanted to be with you, how much they love you, how special you are to them? It'll tell you how much they longed to be with you again. What we remember at Christmas is God planning not just for a year, but God planning for thousands of years. A way in which we could be with him. We remember how God brought together a whole nation, created a nation, out of a man and a woman who could not have a baby. We remember how God had been telling the prophets throughout the Bible that he was going to save people through the forgiveness of their sins. He'd been telling everybody how he was going to make it possible for us to be his. He was so excited that we were going to be with him one day. He couldn't keep it to himself. We remember the meticulous planning of God bringing everything into the right place at the right time. Just to have a messenger born who would announce the next stage. This wasn't even the Saviour, just a messenger who would announce the Saviour. Remember how incredibly special we are to God. So that he would do this, so that we could have our happy ever after with him in heaven. We do also remember that this place in heaven, this happy ever after in eternity, is only for those whose faith is in Jesus Christ, who turn to him for forgiveness. And it reminds us of the many people who still need to hear that. We need to hear that message this Christmas, who need to be reminded what we're remembering so that they will come to Jesus and know about eternity with him. We know from all those who do that, for those who turn to him, there is a forgiveness that we don't deserve. We know that it's a plan that brings us into a relationship with God that he always wanted. We remember that it's a plan that cost God so much, yet offers us everything. It's a plan that was thousands of years in the making. It's a plan that just screams of God's love for you. That is the plan that John was born to announce. That is what we remember this Christmas time. Let's remember what we remember this Christmas.